Well, welcome everyone to our weekly webinar with Dorothy Tannahill-Moran. We appreciate you joining us today. I am Kimberly Kuhlman, and I serve as the Executive Director of the National Spasmodic Dysphonia Association. And these webinars started out of a necessity to connect, especially during this time of sheltering at home. And we are excited that you're joining us today. This is actually the fifth, I believe, in a series that Dorothy has done. All of them are available on our website along with our YouTube channel. So if you haven't caught the last few, you can catch up. In addition, this webinar is being recorded along with being broadcasted on Facebook Live. So hello to everyone who's viewing us on Facebook Live. We will also put some links in the chat box so that you'll have easy access to them. I also wanted to mention that on this past Saturday, we had an extremely successful virtual NSDA symposium. As you know, our symposium was canceled because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we wanted to still provide new content and information. And so our wonderful speakers recorded over 6 hours of new content that was pre-recorded, including Dorothy, who did a wonderful talk on resiliency. And then we also had 4 back-to-back live Q&A panel sessions. And those panel sessions are being edited and will be posted shortly. So there's definitely a lot of content for you to explore and enjoy. Also, before we get started, I also want to mention if you have ideas or thoughts of other topics that you would like to see presented, please let us know. You can put it in the chat box, you can email the NSDA, but we really want to be able to have information that is relevant and useful for you. So today it is my pleasure to welcome once again Dorothy Tannahill-Moran. Dorothy is a career and life coach. She is an author and a speaker who guides people who are working to remove barriers to both professional and personal success. She does have a unique unique perspective and deep knowledge on career development by 21 years of management at Intel Corporation and 12 years as a coach. Dorothy also has spasmodic dysphonia, which gives her insights into the challenges of those facing the voice community. She writes articles for the NSDA. She does these wonderful webinars for us. She's also presented live at support group meetings and symposiums. And in addition, she just is a fabulous person who we love so much. And we appreciate all she does for our community. She's just, she's just given us so much valuable information, and we just can't thank you enough, Dorothy. Today's topic is, what is emotional intelligence and why should I care? And I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy.
Well, thank you. That made my day. Well, thanks. And by the way, if you haven't noticed the little sign over my shoulder, decide what to be and go be it. I always like to have that kind of over my shoulder as a reminder that whatever it is you choose, you can become. Today, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and I wanted to also kind of tie this back to one of the previous webinars, and it was the webinar that we did on how to emerge from the quarantine a better version of you. And in it, I just covered a ton of ground in terms of some new things that you could do or things that you could do to further develop yourself. And one of the things that I talked about was emotional intelligence. Now, when I talked about it, I only spoke in terms of, hey, this is something you should go do, and gave some sites and a couple of skill sets for you to consider developing. I wanted to drill down on this because I think when it comes to emotional intelligence, that it's kind of a new term. We don't really know what it is, or maybe we've got our guesses. So I wanted to really spell out what it is, and I wanted to help you understand why it's important to you, because you should care is the answer to that question. And hopefully I'll make a compelling case with what I'm sharing with you today. And as always, I want to share with you some things so you can develop more or greater emotional intelligence. So Kim, if we go to the slides. All right. So what is emotional intelligence? It's really about being able to observe your own emotions in any given situation and to be able to identify what those emotions are so you can self-regulate. Now, that doesn't mean stifle your emotions or, gee, how do I become stoic? Because in fact, we all have emotions. We all have emotions about all kinds of things that come at us 24/7. So this is not about self-regulating to the point that you're not going to have any, because that would just simply not be the case. You cannot cause yourself to not have emotions. But the self-regulation has to do with how you decide to react and respond to those within yourself, but also to do the same with other people. So you're not only observing, identifying, and self-regulating yourself, but you're observing what's taking place emotionally with the other people. You're identifying what's taking place with the other person, and you are self-regulating your interactions with them. So if you erase everything else, this is the primary core of the definition of what emotional intelligence is. Now, by the way, if you ever see EQ, EQ is emotional intelligence. It's like IQ. Now, going on to put a little bit more meat on the bones of this definition, with emotional intelligence, you're using empathy, which means it's not about you, it's about the other person. You're empathizing with the situation. And the reason why you're deploying empathy is because what you want to do is to enhance your thoughts and enhance your understanding of what's taking place between you and another person. And that's really the bottom line, is for you to understand you're going to have emotions, the other person is going to have emotions. And so what's going to really help out our dynamics, me and you, in this setting. Now, this is not about being nice, because we can all sit back and go, well, I'm a really great person and I'm really nice and I'm always polite to everybody. That's not what emotional intelligence is about. Because yes, most of our parents all taught us those kinds of behaviors, but the issue is more about how you navigate in various social situations and conflicts. So it's when everything is going swimmingly well, then that's great. That's not a problem. But as we know, whether or not it's professional or whether or not it's personal, things don't always go that well in all situations. And sometimes there can be a conflict, and the conflict can be subtle, it can be overt, but it's basically you and I don't have the same expectations about this situation. So emotional intelligence is truly about interpersonal dynamics. It's what's taking place with you. It's what's taking place with this other person. So there you go. That's what emotional intelligence is. So let's look at the next page. And this is where I'm going to make my argument, because I think if there is anything else, this first thing is it. Your emotional intelligence is the single biggest factor that's going to determine your personal and professional success. Now, keep in mind, success is your own definition of success. It's not mine, of you. It's also not things like, oh, well, success means I make a lot of money or I have a big house or any of these other types of things. Success is different for each one of us. And so this is the question of, are you as successful as you possibly can be in both your personal and professional life? And usually the answer to that is, we could all stand to improve. So this is the thing that's going to be the determination of how successful you are, because EQ overshadows how intelligent you are, and it also overshadows your technical abilities. Now, I think we all like to think that it's like, yeah, but I'm as good as it gets when it comes to this thing. Like maybe it's bookkeeping, or maybe it's being a doctor. That's great. You should be, if that's what your personal aspiration is. But understand that if your emotional intelligence is not good enough to interact and to manage the dynamics between you and other people, it makes almost no difference. And the same with your intelligence. And I think we've all seen this, where it's like, oh, that's a smart person, but, you know, and whatever you might end up saying after this. So, you know, gee, they're a smart person, but they lack charm and the ability to get along well with others. Well, there you go. Because this emotional intelligence will always trump these other aspects in all of us. And I think that's kind of a hard pill for some of us to swallow, but it's true. And it's been studied over and over again. And now we've come to recognize this as vital. Now, we can all stand to improve. None of us are perfect. And some of us are more skilled in some aspects of emotional intelligence, but weak in others. And interestingly enough, what tends to take place for us is we lean into our skills and we ignore our weaknesses. And so, if you will, your strengths sometimes can become your weakness as well, because it means you're ignoring these things that you're not doing as well as you can. Now, maybe you're never going to be strong in all of them, but if you're weak, you need to at least move towards, or get the needle moving towards, greater strength. So you've got more balance in various aspects. Now, when you have high emotional intelligence, it supports a whole laundry list of things that for us people with vocal cord disorders is vital, not the least of which is it makes you more resilient. It gives you greater motivation because, well, gee, you know that whatever situation's coming your way, you're going to be able to deal with it. It gives you greater empathy for other people and what might be taking place for them. Just a whole host of things. But let's skip to the last one. It gives or enhances our ability to read and navigate a plethora of social situations and conflicts. And that's really what it comes down to. Because resilience, if you will, is your ability to react and adapt to changing circumstances. And things do change. And if you're reading the situation correctly and you are skilled, you will then know how to react appropriately, recognizing that one size does not fit all with all situations and with all people. I think a lot of times when it doesn't, we think, oh, there's something wrong with this other person, as opposed to us thinking, this is going to require me to change my approach. Next page. Okay, so assuming you have some motivation to improve your emotional intelligence, Where do you start in terms of your improvement program? First, it starts with developing a level of self-awareness, being aware of your emotions in the instance, in that moment, and the behaviors that go with it. Because emotion is one thing. How does that manifest itself into your behavior? Because usually the two things are related. And you want to be aware of what you're doing, but you want to do it without becoming self-absorbed. And I've got a little asterisk here, because one of the things that I noticed with people with vocal cord disorders, and I see this a lot in Facebook groups for spasmodic dysphonia especially, is people get very self-absorbed about their voices. And here's the problem with that. When you get overly concerned about your voice and what's taking place for you, it puts an emotional distance between you and the other person. So let's say you're getting an interview and you're all nervous because of the way you sound. Well, an interview is all about connecting with the other person. You cannot connect with another person if you're sitting there thinking about yourself. It just doesn't work like that. Having your body in the same room is not connecting. So, go back, not quite done. So you do need to, and this is a really valuable thing, learn to pause. Just hit the little mental pause button and observe your emotion. Now, when you hit the pause button, this then allows you the self-regulation, and it puts you at choice. How do I choose to be in this moment? I worked with a man one time. He was the controller for our division, and we would have these, I hosted them, in fact, these weekly billings meetings where all of the parts of the business, the sales, the manufacturing came together. So you could imagine it was a kind of divisive meeting, and voices did get raised. This man would lean over, and he was the perfect example of at choice. He would lean over and say to me, okay, now I'm going to get really tough with this person so they can recognize that there's some things they need to do. Then he'd do it. Then he'd lean over and say, okay, now I'm going to reward this person for responding appropriately. And he'd do that. So he was very good at self-regulating and put at choice what his behaviors and interactions were going to be. One of the other valuable tools is get curious about the other person. This helps you develop empathy. But when you are curious, and I learned this in coaching school, it suspends judgment. Curiosity and judgment cannot coexist in your mind. You're either judging somebody or you're getting curious about them. And when you're curious, you tend to be more empathetic. And so if you get curious, it will help you have more effective rather than ineffective interactions. Okay, next page. So Dorothy's top 4 favorite EQ skills doesn't have to be limited to these, but these are the ones that I personally think are important. Active listening and communication. Communication is the single biggest weakness in every group. And it doesn't make any difference if it's a family group or if it's a work group or if it's a girlfriend group. Your communication will always be your biggest weakness. So categorically, you could work on absolutely nothing other than improving your communications. And that would be a huge help. But a really important aspect of communication is what's called active listening. Active listening is first when you listen without the intention of responding. So you're very careful about just simply listening to understand. And you're listening not only to understand, but you're listening to understand what the emotion is that the other person has at the moment for whatever is being discussed. Then the next part of active listening is validating or playing back what you understand rather than moving forward. So you first, this is another aspect of pausing. You sit there and say, okay, what I think I understood you to say is, and then you play it back in your words. That's active listening, which means that you are truly at that point communicating. Next slide. The second favorite one is constructive confrontation, or sometimes it's called constructive communication. Now, in this particular skill, what we're really talking about is the skill to confront somebody in a constructive way. And of course, you want to dispense with being emotional, and you want to be able to preserve the relationship. So constructive communication has a very specific approach to it and a very specific language. So it's not me trying to nail you. It's me looking at this problem that exists between the two of us and talking about the problem and talking about why it's a problem and how you perceive it. And the whole goal of constructive confrontation is to minimize elevating the emotions. It's going to be difficult because, of course, you are confronting somebody. And a lot of people have a natural defense mechanism. And so it's important for you to keep that to a minimum, because when somebody gets defensive, they stop listening. And if they stop listening, then you've got a bigger problem. So there's lots of things to know about this. I used to teach a whole day-long class on constructive confrontation. And so there's materials and books written on this topic. Next page. The next skill is conflict management. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the difference between constructive confrontation and conflict management? The biggest difference between them is in conflict management, there's already a conflict. You know, perhaps somebody has come to you. In constructive confrontation, it's where you're identifying a problem that involves another person, and it requires interaction with them in order for you to be able to solve the problem and move forward. In this case, somebody is coming at you or the conflict exists. And so the goals of conflict management is to learn how to de-escalate, because usually if there's a conflict, there is going to be heightened emotions. And so there's a very specific method and language that you use for conflict management. An example of what I'm saying here is when somebody comes up and says, this is the 5th time you've parked in my parking place, and I'm getting really tired of it. I've mentioned this to you before, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to match that level of emotion. You want to tone down your voice. You want it to be softer. You want it to be slower. And by doing that, you help the other person to start calming down their emotions. So that's the first goal of conflict management. Now, you also are listening with conflict management. You're not only talking slower, it's like, okay, yes, we have talked about those in the past. And so you want to acknowledge what they're saying without starting to defend your position or even trying to solve the problem. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of conflict management. That's a very specific methodology and language that goes with it. And of course, it targets resolving the mutual problem while preserving the relationship, just like with constructive confrontation. But in this case, it already starts with heightened emotions. Next. So my fourth in my top 4 EQ skills to learn has to do with body language and or what's called microexpressions, which is a form of body language, if you will. Now, if you remember earlier, I said you want to be able to read the situation. Well, part of reading the situation, aside from the words and the intensity and the energy being put off by this person, is you also want to be able to read their body language and what's being expressed in their face. So body language is your ability to pick up emotions from others so you can optimize and respond. So you can understand what's taking place with them and respond accordingly. And understand the difference between body language and microexpression. Body language is your larger physical expression. So this is your legs, your arms. It's whether or not you're leaning in towards a person. It's what's taking place, with the head. That's what I'm talking about in terms of larger physical expressions. And the deal is with body language, some people can learn to control these. And so sometimes you do misread the situation. I would say more often than not, I think the statistics on it is like 80%. 80% of the time, a person's body language is going to express even more than the words that they're using. It's not that you ignore the words, because even words are incredibly important too, but you should be learning some basic body language so you can better communicate with another person and interact with them. Now, microexpressions is not as common to learn and common to be able to find a place to learn more about microexpressions. I became a microexpression practitioner as well as instructor. What it is it's the emotional response that's in the face. And it's called a microexpression because it's very tiny and it's very fleeting. In fact, it's only like, 1 or 2 seconds, but it's always there. We watched Ink Master the other night, and the man that was kicked off and was not going to further compete, you could absolutely see his microexpression. He was very sad, made me very sad. So that's what I'm talking about with regard to microexpressions, is you see these things can't be controlled. A person's emotions will always come across in the face, but it's very fast and it's very small. And so that would be a good thing to learn, even though it's perhaps a little bit challenging to be able to find sources where you can learn that. But you can, it's not impossible. Body language is much more prevalent. And you'll find all of these kinds of things on a site called Udemy, which the link is already in our resource list on the NSDA website. And Udemy is basically 100,000 classes of all sorts and kinds. And certainly everything that I've just talked about, you can find there as well. So there you go, friends. Dorothy's top 4 favorite EQ skills. Just pick one, start at a place. I think you'll have fun. You know, this is all about you. This is all about your effective interactions with other people. And to me, I think humans are the most interesting things. It's like there's always things to learn. So there you go. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful, Dorothy. We appreciate all that great information that you provided. I was just looking to see if there were any questions in the chat, and we did have people viewing on Facebook, which is awesome. As I mentioned, all of these sessions are recorded, and so they will be available to view again, as well as the presentation. So if you were taking notes, you'll have all of that information available by tomorrow on the NSDA website on the webinar page. And we will be having another webinar on Thursday with speech-language pathologist Christy DeLuca, and that will be at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern. So we hope you plan to join us for that. And we will be working on the next series and have that released hopefully soon. They've been really well received, and I feel like this is a new medium for the NSDA that we can really take full advantage of. So please let us know what topics you would like us to to cover, and also, oh, let me check one thing. We do have a question. Okay, we do actually have a question. How do you self-regulate in a stressful situation when stress causes spasmodic dysphonia to worsen?
You know, I think one of the most underrated things that we can do to really help us self-regulate is to breathe. You know, we think we've got to instantly respond or instantly say something, as opposed to just breathe. Now, the next thing, this is my personal favorite, is breathe and then say, let me think about this for a second. You know, it's like dead silence. If you just felt dead silent, that probably would make the other person feel uncomfortable. But if you tell them what's taking place, that it's like, let me think about that for a second. In fact, my husband was on the phone with the buyers of our house, not this one, but another one. And he did that. You know, he took a big breath, he sat back, and he went silent. He said, oh, by the way, what you can't hear is me thinking. So, you know, so that absolutely helps. Now, one of the books that I recommended is a book called Presence by Amy Cuddy. And one of the things that she talks about is how to self-regulate, how to feel more confident. And the best way to do that, and she did lots and lots of testing, she's a doctor, is what's called the Wonder Woman or Superman pose, which I'll kind of stand up here so you can see what it is. It's like this. Before I talk, before I get up and address a group of people, I do that. And it absolutely changes your brain chemistry. So there's a lot of little tricks, you know, physical tricks that you can use to down-regulate yourself. And especially us with spasmodic dysphonia, we need all the tricks that we can find. Those are the ones that work best for me.
That's great, Dorothy. That power pose really does make a difference, especially if you're about to do a presentation or a call, just to kind of boost the confidence and get yourself a little more invigorated. And I think your point to just taking a pause and being silent, you know, that sometimes does a lot more than rushing into a comment or anything like that. So I think that's great advice and such. Wonderful. All right. Well, I just, we've got some good feedback on Facebook also. So glad that we could connect both through the webinar and Facebook. And hopefully we'll see you guys here on Thursday for Christy DeLuca's webinar. And we will see you back soon. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thanks. Bye-bye.